Gaming as an industry has skyrocketed in popularity over the last decade or so, with demands for games at an all-time high, and with it so has gamers' expectations. It seems like every year more and more games are being released in an unpolished state, far beyond what has been advertised. Let's take a step back for a minute to look at when this all started and find out why publishers push out broken, unfinished games, missing content that was once promised. Let's start with No Man's Sky, a game which released in such a state so far from what was promised, it quickly became one of the most hated games in video game history, with companies having to offer wide-scale refunds, changing the very way distributors handle their refund policies. This sort of practice stems from as far back as the release of Watch Dogs. Game companies have released a product that was far from what was first seen in previews of which were shown almost 8 years ago, 2 years before development, showcasing some mind-blowing graphics of that generation, and then 2 years later the game releases looking dirty and lifeless. This was a bad year for Ubisoft, and only recently are they starting to dig themselves out of that hole, as being known for downgrading the graphics of their games. What Hello Games and the teams separately at Ubisoft both did wrong was projecting the games they were selling in a way that altered consumers' perceptions of what the game was going to be like. In Murray's case specifically, almost all the interviews he did mentioned how big the world was, and how it would be impossible to find your friends. Alas, eventually, close to 2 years after the release, No Man's Sky also came scuttling out of his hole better than ever, finally living up to everyone's expectations. However, the damage was already done, for most anyway. More recently, Blizzard has been hit with some of the worst criticism yet, at least as far as Metacritic is concerned anyway. A remaster of its RTS game Warcraft 3, a game I played as a young child, and a game which got me into the whole RTS scene anyway, introducing me to games such as Total War, Sudden Strike and Age of Empires 2. A game that was not very good, really originally, it wasn't too good, but one that I held close to my heart with much nostalgia. When it was going to be reforged, I got excited, as I'm sure many other people did also, especially after the release of Warcraft Classic with next to no issues. The release of Warcraft 3 Forge, however, was met with a launch scene unknown by mankind, with thousands of players seeking refunds and receiving the worst rated video game reviews in a long time. Warcraft 3 was a disappointment, along with games mentioned and so many more. However, we need to look at the bigger picture, and in that picture is game companies releasing games with content completely missing or broken, selling at $60 to $100 at release. Another game series affected by this content drought is EA's Star Wars Battlefront. The first of the games stuck to just 2 factions, a game which gamers and fans were all hyped for. You had the Frostbite engine, known for its photorealism and lighting, and the developers which were responsible for the biggest shooters of the generation, DICE. The first game was met with major backlash, releasing with just 4 game modes and a small number of maps to play them on. This game released at full price, and also had a season pass, which had content added periodically for an additional price of up to $40 just to get content promised before the release. The same thing happened to the second iteration in 2017, where upon the game's release, it was nowhere near as ambitious as developers and publishers said it would be, and has taken 3 years to amend, fortunately enough for gamers via free content updates. With the poor release of games like Battlefront and Battlefield over the last years, EA have decided to miss an entire fiscal year of releasing any games, and promise to continue to add content to their games and support them like Star Wars and their Battle Royale game Apex Legends. We can only hope that this extra year provided is so developers can spend more time ironing out bugs and increasing content on launch. Finally, big studios are taking a step back and realising that perhaps pumping out games every year isn't where the money is anymore. Perhaps they have learned that taking a year off and really working on these games, their image can be amended. And it will take time. The internet never forgets. Regardless, we as a community need to be more open-minded to game studios. I'm not saying like everything they put out there, but perhaps avoid disliking games because of a trailer, or judging a new game because of the studio developing it. And they have put close to 2 to 3 years on a game, and a huge majority of the time it's the publishers and investors that make the big shots, that go as far as cutting things entirely from the game. The issue lies mainly with the publishers pushing games out too early, but the blame also lies on the consumers. What I'm talking about is complacency, where the excitement for a product is so overwhelming, you buy it at full price along with a season pass and love it automatically just because you've been waiting for a long time. Regardless of gameplay, regardless of how frustrating your experience is, and regardless of how many game crashes and performance issues you may discover. And you may say, well, no product is perfect, that's unrealistic, but why can't it be? Why can't it be? Why can that not be realistic? How is it that big game studios being pumped with $1 million can't make a complete game when you have indie developers making games off their own backs with nothing? And I'm not by means telling you what to like and dislike. I quite liked Radical Heights before it was removed from the face of the earth, so take what I do say lightly. I know the games may be more complex, I hear what you're saying, but with teams of somewhere between 50 and 200 in some cases, that you're overworking and underpaying, and you can't even publish a game with a teeny tiny smidgen of love for the consumer. As Total Biscuit always said, this is in no one else's hands but ours. We need to use our power as consumers to tell the corporations what we want. Which is simple, really. We want games that work, without having to wait years for them to work. And until that time comes, when we don't boycott publishers for petty drama involving streamers getting banned, but because they're doing things bad for the industry, the game industry is never going to heal. It's only going to become more toxic and something that we don't even want to be a part of anymore. Games will always be around. Fortunately enough for us, it's on its teething stages. I'd like to believe that the gaming industry will one day be less conglomerate and more consumer friendly. That's all for this video anyway, so thank you for watching. This is my first video, so if you like what you see, please subscribe, and let me know what you think in the comments as well, and I'll see you in the next video.